Wesley Snipes, he's been a killer and a commando. Patrick Swayze, he's been a heartthrob and a hero. But these tough guys are about to face the most physically challenging roles of their careers.
Let's give it to him, girl.
Meet Vida Bohème,
Enchanté.
Why are you crying? Maybe she just found out Menudo broke up.
Miss Noxzema Jackson,
Jesse's daughter.
and their protege, Chichi Rodriguez.
I'm the Latino Marilyn Monroe. I got more legs than a bucket of chicken.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan and joining me on this journey is...
Dan Bergman.
Alright, episode 8. Here we are.
Wow, we're moving up in the world, aren't we?
We are. We got 8 whole episodes. That's pretty impressive. For this episode, we are reviewing To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. Which, I gotta say, for some reason, I always want to inject a love in there. You know, Thanks for Everything, love Julie Newmar, and I know that it's not in there.
It's an easy mistake, considering the nature of this movie. I mean, love is a very potent underlying theme, so you'd be forgiven for wanting to interject that, and I don't think the filmmakers would fault you for it.
I don't think so. I think they'd be happy that we were watching the film, and they'd probably be happy that we're discussing it.
And we're discussing it because we love it.
Love. Interesting choice of words.
You know, varying degrees of such.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that.
But that's a conversation for another time.
Well, later on the podcast when we get to final thoughts. So, Dan, how did this movie get on your shelf?
Simply because I loved it. I don't know if I had to put that kind of inflection in there, but here's the thing. You know, I remember in the Navy we used to kind of razz you about, you liking musicals. And, we weren't quite as enlightened then as we are now. I love drag queens. So I don't know where that came from. It was a slow evolution. The attitude, the confidence, everything about them. I enjoy drag queen movies. I mean, this one, The Birdcage, the other movie we were talking about, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It just this was a natural fit for my collection.
Okay. I don't actually own this movie. I had to rent it on the streaming service that one could rent it on.
Amazon?
I guess I could say it. Yes, I rented it on Amazon.
Yes.
This is not an advertisement for Amazon.
We just use it.
Yeah, I just use it when I don't own the movie. I'm okay with that.
I'm sure they appreciate the free advertisement.
I'm sure they do. So, because this was a natural fit for you and you like drag queens, I do recall way back in the day you said you'd gone to a couple of drag shows when we were in San Diego.
Yes, actually, a few of my associates, there was a few drag shows in San Diego, in the Hillcrest area, and yeah, I just thought it was a blast. It was just a lot of fun. I thought I was going to be uncomfortable. Like I said, I wasn't quite as enlightened then, but it was just a lot of fun. People were very welcoming. I don't want to say that I felt that I fit in because I still wasn't part of that group, but I didn't feel like I didn't belong. So I don't know if you can understand that.
No, I can. You're included. It's just that when we go behind the doors and do the things that we do, you're not included. In that, you're family, but you're like a cousin. You're not my brother or my sister.
At the very least, a welcome guest.
Mm-hmm.
From there, like I said, it was an evolution, and there were other movies that came out shortly thereafter. Like I said, The Birdcage. To Wong Foo was kind of a late addition to my library, and like I said, it was a natural fit. It was a great movie. I remember seeing the commercials for it, and we were like, okay. But when I actually finally did see it, I was like, wow, why'd I wait so long?
I don't remember when I first saw this movie. It was probably, obviously it was while I was in the Navy, but I don't remember when I actually saw the movie. That's odd. I mean, considering the amount of movies that you and I have both seen, to not remember, when you saw something is probably not odd, but to not remember when you saw a movie like this, which is so out of the norm, is a little bit more odd.
Yeah, it was weird. Like I said, I didn't see this in theaters. I didn't see it on any kind of streaming because I saw it before streaming became a thing, and it was just. It was probably just one of those nights where I was by myself, and it was like, all right, let's see something different. This looks interesting. This looks like a lot of fun, and yeah, it was like finding a gold coin while you're walking along the beach. It's like, whoa, look at this.
Hey, this is a good movie.
Yeah.
So I am curious, and this goes to more the idea behind it. And you had said that you weren't that enlightened yet, or as enlightened as you are now. Did you feel uncomfortable going to see the movie, or did you feel as though if you told someone, hey, I'm going to see To Wong Foo, did you feel as though you would be derided or judged? Yes.
Be honest, no. I think this movie was just enough under the radar at the time that, me renting it at a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, I don't think it made anybody look at me funny or anything. It's not like I went to the corner, Family One and rented porn, and it's like that little crazy feeling you get. It's like, don't judge me. No, I didn't have that.
Okay.
I think most people at the time too, because like I said, the theatrical release was very subtle. A few TV commercials here and there, but it was not like everyone was talking about it. There were a few talk shows that mentioned like, Wesley Snipes and Patrick Swayze are drag queens, and then it sort of disappeared for a while.
That I seem to recall that sort of media presence or lack thereof as well. My next question. Do you think that this movie would be well received today, even though we are theoretically a more enlightened people?
Well, that depends on what you consider well received. I mean, will it cause controversy?
Absolutely.
I don't know. See, that's the thing. I think, again, when I use the term, again, under the radar, I think the idea of drag queens has gone beyond the point where it's a thing, even for the ardent conservatives. It's in other words, it's these new issues have come out, and in their minds, they've got bigger fish to fry than somebody who wants to dress in women's clothing. I think it'd be like, hey, look at this, and they'd be like, yeah, we know about that. We'll get to that later, and they'll just promptly forget about it. So I don't think that this would stir too many pots anymore, because it's really, there are bigger spoons, if I have to use an analogy.
I think that it would. And I say that because with all the hullabaloo around transgender folks and transgender bathroom laws, and we're going to avoid the whole political thing. I don't want to go there. Just from the idea of the movie, a movie about men who cross-dress, about gay men who cross-dress, which again is a distinction, could be confused with promoting transgenderism, even though they are two separate things.
I see where you're going with that, and I would agree with you to the extent that it would probably take some politician who's really digging for something to make a name for himself, and to dig this out and say, look at this. This is a problem. This is wrong. This is what's wrong with America. Other than that, I mean, like I said, most Americans nowadays, it used to be a day when I was younger. You saw a transvestite or a drag queen walking down the street, and people would point and stare and snicker or make faces. Nowadays, at least here in Los Angeles, you see one walking down the street, and people hardly ever bat an eye. So to me, that's at least a good change. I don't know if the actual drag queen would feel the same, because obviously a lot of times they do it because they want to be seen, they want to be recognized, and to be ignored. I don't know, to be part of the crowd. I don't know if that's the absolute desired result.
Yeah, drag queens tend to be obviously flamboyant.
Yes, but like I said, I think they've become so much closer to the norm that, again, at least here in Los Angeles, people hardly bat an eye.
I just mean as a movie concept, because there are so many people, or at least so many people presented on social media and that sort of thing, that were upset about the possibility of a gay character in the Beauty and the Beast live action remake. There were people, a very small number of people, that were upset that Star Wars had one of the main characters as a black person. There's still people out there. I'm just curious if they would be more vocal and lose their minds, their collective minds, over something like this.
At the risk of going a little off subject here, those instances that you're mentioning, those aren't real. And let me elaborate on that. It's the term, they're trolls.
Was that fake news?
No, it wasn't fake news. These were people actually protesting, but they were protesting because they wanted to put themselves out there. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to show that there's a controversy where there really wasn't. They're stoking the ashes of a barbecue that burnt out, weeks ago. Because, I mean, you're talking about, people were upset over Boyega being a black stormtrooper. It's like, oh, a black person in Star Wars. It's like, really? Lando Calrissian? That doesn't bother you? It's just like, yeah, it's been done. Why are you making an issue now? It's a whole nothing thing. So for somebody to go back to the movie that we're talking about, for somebody to bring this movie up, yeah, again, they're trying to stoke a fire out of old barbecue ash, and it's not going to happen. All you do is going to get dirty and dusty. And like I said, I think if they try to bring this up, people are going to say, "Oh yeah, I remember that movie." In typical fashion, what manufactured controversies, all they tend to do is make people go watch the movie. It's like, well, what's this movie that he's talking about? Let's go watch it, and then people realize, wow, that was a fun movie. I like that. Totally backfires on them.
A lot of times it does. It's interesting. I don't want to keep going down this line of conversation. I was just curious if you thought that the movie would be well received in this day and age. One of the things I did while I was watching this movie was take some notes, which I've found is a great way of keeping my thoughts organized. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, if you could use one word to describe the three main characters, Noxzema, Vita, and Chi-Chi, what would it be for each?
Outrageous. For all three of them. And outrageous in a good way.
Okay.
I had entertained the possibility of trying my hand at being a drag queen, but again, me myself being so self-critical, I'm not ugly enough to be a funny one, and I'm not pretty enough to be a good one. So it never played out for me, because I mean, I thought it's like, even like I said, even you guys got like Divine. I mean, God, man, that man was hideous, but damn, he worked it.
Well, everybody's got to have a dream.
So like, and, this kind of falls into, as I was saying, when we talked about Rocky Horror Picture Show. And, it's like, I just didn't want to admire Tim Curry. I wanted to be him. That
captures something that you already sort of foreshadowed in a previous episode.
Yeah. And, it fits the right genre, too. I mean, I think he was just dark enough to where it's like, I probably could fit into that. But, again, I'm no Tim Curry, so I'm not even trying to fill those shoes.
I thought about my own question and came up with one word for each. And I would describe Chi-Chi as feisty, in that feisty stereotype of an inexperienced drag queen. I used the word elegant to describe Vita, Patrick Swayze's character, because what the drag queen archetype that she was going for was more of an elegance. And Noxzema, Wesley Snipes' character, was fierce. And that was going for a more in-your-face kind of approach to the drag queen, which is interesting because it shows that not only is it a subculture, but it has its own subculture, if you catch what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's an interesting way we can segue to this, because I remember you were talking about how you weren't quite as adept as the different categorizations or anything. Was this film kind of that learning experience for you? That
it was, because like many people, I didn't understand the distinctions between the transgender and the transvestite and the drag queen and all of those different things. And there's a line in the movie, and I think before we started recording, you had mentioned that. So
Yeah, let's play. This is like my favorite scene in the whole movie, and it pretty much sums up our quote unquote learning experience.
Darling, if you're going to become a drag queen, you're going to have to learn these things.
What do you mean, be a drag queen? I am a drag queen.
Oh, child, no. You will simply put a boy in a dress. When a straight man puts on a dress and gets his sexual kicks, he is a transvestite. When a man is a woman trapped in a man's body and has the little operation, he is a transsexual. I know that. When a gay man has way too much fashion sense for one gender, he is a drag queen.
Thank you.
And when a tired little Latin boy puts on a dress, he is simply a boy in a dress.
Pretty much sums it up.
yeah, exactly. And that sort of brought things around like, oh, I didn't actually understand that was the way that worked. Okay. None of what I saw on this movie bothered me in the way that some people will feel uncomfortable when they watch men in drag. The story was very typical. They're going on an emotional journey. You could have swapped the gender roles. You could have changed their clothes and been straight men, straight women. They could have been women dressed in drag or dressed in men's clothes, which, is that the same thing? I don't know.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever even looked at that, if women dressing in men's clothes is still considered drag.
I don't know.
I'll have to look that up. I know somewhere in storage I have a book on the history of drag queens. I'm sure I can find the answer on that one. I think what you're trying to, in so many words, or trying to bring out is that what made this movie likable to us, what really endeared us, is that it's not just a drag queen movie. I mean, this is a very human story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we're going back to the things that we started talking about all the way back to episode 1. It's like funny, we're talking all the way back. These are story archetypes. These are journeys, and we've been telling these types of stories since humans have started telling stories. And this one it's the road trip. Each person has an obstacle or a challenge to get over. In this case, it doesn't matter if they're drag queens or if it's all a bunch of straight Christian white men of the alt-right or whatever. I mean, it's still a journey. For either case, if they did it right, I would probably like the other alternative. If it had the same amount of heart and humanity in it as this one did, then, it's a journey story.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a stereotypical road trip movie. Agree wholeheartedly. But again, going back to what I'd said earlier, it is a sneak peek into the subculture. And one of the things that we stereotype is drag queens. Look at RuPaul, for example.
Who makes an appearance in this movie.
I was just about to say that. Who shows up in this movie and does RuPaul, which one of the things that I wanted to point out was she comes on stage as the previous winner of Miss New York Drag Queen, or whatever the title was. I don't exactly remember.
Drag Queen of the Year.
For New York City, though.
Yeah, well, they never made that distinction. They just referred to it as Drag Queen of the Year. I think of New York, it was just kind of implied.
Oh, okay. But she shows up wearing a glitter-spangled Confederate flag skin-tight dress.
Yeah,
and I had to laugh at the irony of that.
And I think if she got word of that you noticed that, and I think she would like that.
Yeah, I think it was completely intentional.
Because knowing her personality, that's exactly what she was going
At
for.
least the personality that is portrayed for the public.
Yes.
And I was going to say, I don't know any drag queens, so I'm not sure about the behaviors, but going back to my individual words to describe them, each one of them represented a stereotype of a particular type of drag queen that I have in my mind. So we talked about the Birdcage, I think we mentioned that earlier, but Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil also had a transvestite in it. All of the drag queens tend to have a flamboyant air. Like you'd said earlier, they're there to be seen. They have so much fashion sense that they can't be confined, as Wesley Snipes' character put it. My question then becomes, is that stereotype valid? I know we like to avoid, and when I say we, I mean the collective we as society, generally like to avoid stereotypes, but in the case of this movie, they are playing up to the stereotypes of drag queens. So are those valid? You've been to drag shows, you've spoken with drag queens. Is that accurate? And is the portrayal accurate?
Well, first, I'd like to respond with if you've ever watched the animated TV show Archer, there was an episode with a couple of gay men who were, secret agents, enemy agents, or whatever. But the one line they said, "Hello, stereotypes exist for a reason," and I think stereotypes are like any tool. It depends how you use them, and obviously some tools are more harmful than others. They require a lot more care and expertise. And in that being said, I would say from an outsider's point of view, a welcome guest, I should qualify that, that the stereotype that's portrayed in this movie and most others that you've mentioned is true. You become a drag queen because ultimately boil it down, and especially when you look at films like To Wong Foo, Birdcage, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. They're not just drag queens because it's something they want to do for themselves, but they're entertainers. They want to entertain, and whatever the motivation is to make people happy or to make people love them, or both. They have to play up to that stereotype of being flamboyant, being noticed, being as outrageous as you possibly can. And the benefit of that, I must add, is that it breeds within them a character of confidence and courage, and the ultimate of, this is who I am, love me or not. Just, if you don't like me, fine, but damn it, you're gonna love me,
One of the interesting things that brings up is, damn it, you're gonna love me or accept me, is a lot of times that is a mask for the lack of acceptance. Let's go to Vita. When they show up in Eugene's hometown, and they're at Eugene's house, you see the frustration and the struggle for acceptance within Eugene, Vita, her, within her own family. She has never been accepted by her family. That's her emotional journey. That's the piece that she comes to announce when they all clasp hands in the room in the hotel in Snydersville. Don't know why I remember the name of the town, but it was on a sign, so there we are. But that was her journey, was to find that acceptance, or at the very least to understand in her own mind that the acceptance was not required. You have to be comfortable in your own skin with who you are.
I got something a little different from that scene. It's sort of related to a little bit of my own personal struggles. Granted, I'm not a drag queen, and I was never shunned by my family in such a manner. But there was certain aspects of myself that I always looked for acceptance from my family, which I never really got. But there was always that feeling that, okay, my family doesn't accept me. That hurts. Now I'm over it, or I've learned to live with it, or I've adapted to it, and I've learned to see that there are others who do accept me and who do love me for the person that I've become, in spite of my parents. So I think that, yeah, her personal journey was that, or rather I should say specifically that scene, was the kind of that verification that, like, I'm going to drive up, and are they going to accept me? I'd be nice if they did. But, she quickly came to that decision that, nope, I could see it from clear across the lawn. She does not accept me, and nothing has changed. Moving on. Let's continue the road trip and everything. And it was just kind of that last bit where it's just like, they don't accept me? Fine. There are so many others who do. And, her journey was to find more, it seems. And she found that in, what was the name of the town again? Snydersville. She found that, some more of that in a very unlikely place. Which, again, it was one thing for her to make it from New York to Los Angeles and find acceptance among, I don't want to say her own kind, but, her crowd, her peeps, it's like,
Sure.
Yeah, okay, it's great that you're accepted, but to find acceptance in an unlikely place, like that tiny little village in the middle of nowhere, Midwest, anywhere, America, that was more powerful.
Yeah, or as she referred to it, this lovely little hamlet.
Yes.
But I think, and again, going to later on after they have the hand clasping in the room, she does say that she wants to go back to her hometown and talk to her family and basically just put it on the table and then sort of move on with her life. So I think that kind of modifies what you were saying a little bit. But when she drove off from the hometown, she was angry and hurt. You could see it. It was very well portrayed. And that is one thing that, as we segue, that I do want to talk about, is the three actors that they used, John Leguizamo, Wesley Snipes, and Patrick Swayze, were at very high points in their career, and they were all playing generally very manly men. And to see them play the role of drag queens was...
It was outrageous.
Yeah, it was outrageous, but it was a credit to them as actors that they were comfortable enough to do that, because I don't know that many actors would do that nowadays. I think there are a lot that would, but I think that there are a lot more that would probably feel a little weird about it and may not do it.
I think maybe at the time that this was made, that would be right. Like I said, doing that, I don't know, it's kind of becoming more, and I dare I use the N-word, and for me the N-word is normal.
Ah!
Yeah, I think, again, like, somebody coming out and saying, oh, look, I'm doing a drag movie, people be like, yeah, and?
I agree. I think that would be more likely the case, but maybe I'm not watching the right movies. But I haven't seen those types of movies making a huge appearance. And it seems like, and again, going back to the 3 movies that we've used as examples, those all came out in around the mid-90s, and they were generally well received. To Wong Foo, The Birdcage, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which I think Priscilla's a little more of a cult movie, and I say that in the sense of, if you knew about it, you knew about it, but a lot of people are like, what is this movie you're talking about? When if you say To Wong Foo and The Birdcage, people are like, oh, okay, I know what those are.
For the sake of this discussion, it was a foreign film, and yeah, it's a cult movie, but the wonderful thing about it, it's not a lot unlike To Wong Foo, because it is a road movie. There was a little bit more serious overtones or undertones. I don't know which one is appropriate in this, but there was a lot of more serious drama involved, especially when it talks about the prejudices involved with being gay in a society that doesn't quite accept them yet. But the other wonderful thing about it that parallels To Wong Foo is that the actors in that movie, in their perspective, demographic, were all manly men. Terrence Stamp, who we mentioned earlier in an earlier conversation, General Zod from Superman 2, Chancellor Valorum in The Phantom Menace, and he was the Limey, which I think was his last action movie or anything, but, you know, manly man. Hugo Weaving, Agent Smith from the Matrix, and Guy Pearce, all of these very manly men from their demographic, and again, they're playing flamboyant, drag queen homosexuals.
Yeah, and it was a good movie. I mean, I don't own Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and I don't know if you do.
I don't own that one yet.
Yeah, I have seen it.
Yeah, me too.
But it didn't leave as much of an impression as this movie did.
No, like I said, it had some more dramatic, darker undertones than this one did, dealing with the same issue. So I think that's why this one was a little bit more attractive, and that's why I own it over Priscilla.
Okay.
Now, comparing those 2 movies, which I consider, parallels, but then The Birdcage, even though it deals with drag queens and being homosexual in a society that doesn't quite accept them, though, the stark contrast of that was The Birdcage, which they were living in a society where the issue of acceptance really didn't come up per se until, they met the senator, and then that was just kind of a comedic point, because they didn't really put a spotlight on the anti-homosexual issue in that.
And that goes to where they were living. If they'd have been living in Omaha, Nebraska, that probably would have been an entirely different conversation.
Or it could have been an entirely different story if they were in something like Mississippi. I can't even name a city in Mississippi right now. But
Jackson, Mississippi, Tupelo, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi, yeah. I don't even think the Birdcage would exist in that town. Like, they'd open it and it would be closed.
They're like, oh, yeah, no. Nobody came. It's weird.
But to again mention that movie, the other stark contrast was the type of drag queens that they were portraying. Robin Williams and Nathan Lane, they weren't trying to be fierce. They weren't trying to make any statements or anything. They were putting on a show.
But that's the thing. Robin Williams and Nathan Lane in The Birdcage, which, just real quick, I had forgotten Robin Williams was in To Wong Foo, and I was pleasantly surprised when he showed up. I was like, oh, look at that, there he is.
Yeah, that was a great cameo.
Yes. In The Birdcage, they weren't drag queens. They were just gay men who owned a drag queen show, or that put on a drag queen show in their bar. The only reason that Nathan Lane got into the dress was to portray the normal nuclear family to the senator and his wife when they showed up. So there's a little bit of a difference there, although there were some drag queens in the movie. It wasn't necessarily about drag queens.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I was trying to make, is that, yeah, it's like being a drag queen wasn't their thing. Their struggle wasn't to be accepted as drag queens. Their struggle was actually domestic. It's like, I'm trying to, here we have we have a business to put on, we have a home to keep, and now we have a son who's getting married. It's like, so the struggles were different.
Absolutely. But the other thing, kind of going back to one of the story tropes in this movie, is there's also the trope of the two older, more experienced, insert character archetype here, teaching a noob the ropes. And again, goes to the road trip piece, but it could have happened in one location. They each learn something from each other. The confrontation with John Leguizamo's character with Chi-Chi and Vita in the hotel room, Chi-Chi tells Vita, "You're just an old, white guy trying to compensate for something." I forget the exact words, but it's hammered home when she stands up and catches her wig on, I don't even know what that was, something hanging from the roof, or from the ceiling rather, and it pulls her wig off, and it's the short hair, and she has that moment like, oh, yeah, some of that actually makes sense. Damn it. But again, this is the noob, the young person, or the inexperienced person, telling the more experienced person that you're not right either. And I think that Noxzema and Vita had both reached a point where they'd kind of let their comfort and success let them rest on their laurels, and they had developed a certain degree of cynicism, where Chi-Chi was still inexperienced enough to think that she could do whatever she wanted and didn't want to turn into those two. So, I don't know, there was a certain, it was optimism versus cynicism, and they realized that neither one of those is correct 100%, that you have to temper your optimism with a little bit of cynicism, and you have to temper your cynicism with a little bit of optimism. I don't know, but do you think that's a fair statement?
I think that's a very accurate statement of the relationship between those two.
Well, I think Noxzema was there just to stir up trouble.
You know what? I would say yes and no to that. I think she stirred up trouble, but she had a purpose as far as the movie's concerned, as far as the storytelling. She was very self-absorbed. She didn't really care for anybody but herself. It was very evident when they first meet Chi-Chi, and they're like, why are we bothering with this little peasant? She lost. She's not our concern. And Vita, being the person that she is, no, we must help those. And Noxzema had to be reminded that being a drag queen means we help others, and she's like, all right, fine.
Oh, and she does that throughout the entire movie.
Absolutely. She was like that until she met Clara. And Clara was just this recluse of the town. Even in a small town like that, she was the town recluse. She didn't talk, she just kind of hung out, and everyone just sort of dismissed her as, she's a little off, she just hangs out by herself. And Noxzema, for whatever reason, whether she was bored or whatever, she decided to go make a connection. And when she made that connection, it was like they both blossomed. Because it's like, yeah, look at the pictures that I have. And it's like, oh my goodness, look at the pictures. And then she showed her clothes collection, and Noxzema just was like, and now she had somebody to, and I don't want to say that, she had somebody to care about, but, for lack of a better way, she suddenly had someone to care about, someone that she could share things with and make a connection with. And to me, that was her journey, to find a connection.
Learning to not be so self-absorbed. No,
Correct.
The interesting thing about that was the connection was over old movies, and that was something that they both had a passion for. So I think that speaks to our connections with other humans, is realizing that you can find things in common with people in the most unlikely of places.
Yeah, I hadn't really looked at it that way, but yeah, that totally fits the template. Yeah, because the point I was going to make is that, yeah, she was, she's part of the, she's part of this road trip, just by the sheerest of accidents, that they had a tie and the beauty pageant, and she's along for the ride because she has to. She needs to get to Los Angeles to do this other beauty pageant for an even bigger prize than what she got in New York. And I think that if it wasn't for that need, she wouldn't even be part of this group. So whether or not she felt that she needed to make a connection somewhere, the movie portrayed that yes, she needed it. She's on this road trip, and she eventually finds it.
Yeah, and the tie was what put her in that place to begin with, but she was already friends with Vita in the first place, so she already had a connection, but it was just within her small circle. I don't think that she was the kind of person that would go out of her way to make new friends. Like, no, why? I've got the people that I've got, and I'm good. Let's move on.
Yeah, she had a connection with Vita, but I never saw that it was a very strong connection. I mean, they tended to throw words at each other. Not hurtful words and everything, but it didn't seem like it would take much for Noxzema to be like, okay, do your thing. I'm going to do mine. Bye.
Well, I think they were, opposite ends of this of the spectrum. And again, it plays out. You have to have both sides of that in order for this journey to be complete. Vita, and you already said it yourself, Vita was the one who wanted to help people and understood that was an aspect of being a drag queen. And Noxzema wanted to embrace the queen part and just be above it all and use the royal we. Oh, we are not amused. Without the actual interaction and connection with other people. They were just opposite sides of the same person. You put them together, you've got a whole person, which is why they worked so well together, in my opinion, because they did represent the yin and the yang, and not the Wong. That's something else.
To kind of segue over to the title, the two Wong Foo, thanks for everything, Julie Newmar. It was written on the picture that they stole from the restaurant where they made the ticket exchange with Robin Williams. But they never really talked about what that was.
They never talked about who Wong Foo was.
Yeah. So is that just one of those movie elements where it's just what do they call that, the MacGuffin? It's just it's there, but you never really know what it is.
I think that's the right word.
Yeah, I don't even know if it qualifies.
It's not Chekhov's gun, because that's a thing that they show and then use later. And I think the only time they ever invoke the name of Wong Foo was, aside from the initial two Wong Foo when they see the picture, is when Vita sends out, we'll call it a prayer, if you will, to Wong Foo to help make everything right and that sort of thing. But beyond that, even when they meet Julie Newmar, it's never a point of discussion, although meeting Julie Newmar was nothing more than the placing of a crown on a head. I don't even think it was important to find out who Wong Foo was. Wong Foo could be anyone you want them to be.
I guess so. Yeah, just a little side conversation in our discussion.
Well, I like that as a piece to move the story along. Was the inspiration, the photo with the signature on it, because that used to be, and if you go to the Hard Rock Cafe or Planet Hollywood when it was big, and a lot of, the little diners, I'm sure there are plenty of them in LA.
Oh yeah.
Where there are, old pictures of old movie stars that happened to show up at the restaurant or at the cafe one time. And they just posted it because, look, Sammy Davis Jr. was here once, or Julie Newmar was here, that sort of thing. So I like that as a kind of a tip of the hat to what a lot of cafes will do when somebody famous shows up. And I think that's kind of what it was. It was just Wong Foo owned a cafe or something, a restaurant. Julie Newmar showed up. Just did the Julie Newmar autograph thing, and that served as the inspiration once she saw the picture.
I get it. I like it. I'll go with it.
And I say, or if you want to go even deeper, it could be the recognition that Wong Foo, whoever this person was, had the chutzpah to go up to Julie Newmar with a photo and get her to autograph it. Which embodies the flamboyant and outgoing nature of drag queens.
Equally good.
I try.
Yeah, you succeeded there. And, to add, Julie Newmar is a wonderful addition to be the inspiring figure. Because I met Julie Newmar. Now, granted,
Really?
Yes, this was way back in the past. I was in the 6th grade. And she was a close friend of my 6th grade teacher. And so when we had a school event, my teacher, her name was Faith Flam. She was a short little old lady with, just this really raspy voice and everything, but wonderful lady. She invited Julie Newmar to this event, and as a class we got to meet her, and oh my goodness, even at that young age, you were in the presence, because I knew her as Catwoman from the Batman serials.
She is the only Catwoman. Mentioned in the movie, too, by Vita.
Huh. I don't remember that line.
Yeah, there's a line in there where she says, "Oh, Julie Newmar, you are the only Catwoman."
Just be careful.
I chuckled.
Yeah, you got the wrong crowd that might start a fight. But I'd agree with you. She was, to me, she was the Catwoman. The tall, slender, she had the right attitude. And like I said, meeting her, she was ginormous. She was towering. And I didn't have the vocabulary then, but looking back, statuesque
Is an appropriate word.
Poised, glamorous. If there's a word out there to embody all of those descriptions, and then that applies to her. So I thought I'd add that fun little story.
Nice. So, let me ask you this. One of the things that gets the story sort of rolling is their interaction with Sheriff Dullard. That's a misspelling.
You're talking Chris Penn's character, correct?
Yes, the sheriff that chased him around in sort of in a twist on the Cinderella story.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this because sometimes I do that. But when they had the interaction with the sheriff, broken tail light, okay, you're going to provide me with sexual favors or whatnot, and the inherent racism displayed by Sheriff Dullard, which, again, was an appropriate name, and I'm sure they did it on purpose. When he is knocked unconscious, was it right of them to leave? I mean, I get that it moved the story along and it gave us sort of a conflict and something amusing to watch in the background. But was it because they were afraid that they might get in trouble, potentially? Or was it more because they were afraid of the reaction that they would get from any other law enforcement officers that showed up to investigate this, potentially? Because, and that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, was the reaction by the three, I assume they're state troopers, to the sheriff was, "You got beaten up by a woman?" And, they all laugh, again, that stereotype thing of, manly men, we don't get beat up by women. I was just curious, what was the reason for their fear?
Well, I think that scene, in my opinion, that was probably the closest, and forgive me if this is not entirely accurate, but I mean, I think this is the closest they got to an actual fear for their lives kind of thing, being gay men, being drag queens in a society that doesn't fully accept them. Because, when you bring law enforcement into it, and I know this is going to piss off a lot of people or anything, but, they're not always the most noble people in the world. And you're about as likely to get hurt by somebody behind a badge as you're likely to be anybody else you meet on the street. That being said, especially being on on the fringe society, yeah, that fear is very real. And to act irrational, whether it's right or wrong, it's understandable. And me watching that film and watching that scene, totally believable. It didn't make it controversial. Wrong kind of movie, the different kind of context. Obviously, they're going to show that everything turned out okay. He wasn't hurt seriously. He wasn't left to freeze to death or,
Oh,
or
sure,
tied to
sure.
a fence post to die or anything. It was just it was a comedic like, oh my god, I knocked him out. Let's get out of here. It's like, not to compare him to kids, but it was just like The Simpsons, where Bart fell off not his motorcycle, his skateboard, and then all the kids are like, he's hurt. Let's get out of here. So it I don't know. I think it was accurate as well as comedic.
I agree. That makes sense. And I didn't want to get too deep into that. It intrigued me because I think it was representative of the fear, like you had said, that something could happen to gay men in drag, and they make it a point to say my driver's license says Eugene, says male, and this is going to be a problem we're going to have to work through, which in 1995 was a much bigger deal than, as we discussed, it is now, but it's still an issue, especially in stereotypical middle of the country, flyover land in the mountains, or I don't even think they actually say what state they end up in. It's just not New York and it's not California.
It's that no man's land that New Yorkers and Californians kind of we don't go there.
I know they thought they were in West Virginia, so I was assuming it was like West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, somewhere in there in the backwoods. I wonder if there's actually a Snydersville, and I'm sure there's a Snydersville, but I'm curious where they actually filmed that.
If I could just interject, that could have easily had been filmed in California, because even here in LA County and neighboring San Bernardino County, there are little areas, I don't know if you want to call them towns, but little areas that kind of look like that. They're a little isolated from the main urban centers.
Yeah, I think we decided to call them hamlets earlier, as per the movie.
Yeah. So, and again, just to kind of say, it's like, when I said to Californians and New Yorkers, we don't go there. That is a joke. We go places. We like to, at least in my circle of friends, we like to say we're all accepting everything, but we joke about it.
But it's going to going to that stereotype piece, like, oh, Californians and New Yorkers, oh yeah, California, land of fruits and nuts. It's a joking stereotype, which again goes back to what you were talking about earlier. A stereotype can be used as a thing of comfort, or it can be used as a weapon. And I think this movie does a good job of representing both sides of that. Because, and again, I think that's what I was trying to get to when I was talking about Chi-Chi and Vita having their argument in the hotel room, is they were poking at the stereotypes of each other. And poking hard and using it as a weapon, as opposed to using it as an empowering identity. And that was one of the other things that had written down in my notes, was identity. So I don't know if you know this or not, and this is a free plug for my friend John's book that he's writing called The Framework. It is designed as a framework, if you will, for finding success in your life. And not monetary success, financial success, but internal success. And it sort of documents his own struggles as he went through his life and overcame what he felt were the obstacles placed in front of him by his upbringing. But one of the chapters that he and I recently discussed was on identity, and how we use our identity to sometimes limit us. And you'll see this a lot of times. How come you can't do that thing? Oh, well, I'm just a housewife. Or, why didn't you do something? Well, I'm not that person. And we will stop ourselves from doing something, or not allow ourselves to achieve success, because we will use our identity as a limiter as opposed to an enabler. And he and I were having a conversation about that, about the way he'd written his chapter, and I was trying to explain that sometimes people will use the same identities that people use to limit as an identity to empower. and I used an example from the television show Shark Tank. Do you watch that at all?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a lady who was recently divorced. She had 2 kids, and she loved Christmas. Loved the holiday. That was her favorite holiday. She had Christmas decorations. They showed some footage from her at her house and her kids doing all the Christmas stuff. And she had started her own business sending out packages from Santa. Look at it, it was like a letter from Santa, and it was a personalized letter and a personalized little gift and things like that on stationery, and it looked nice, and it was from the North Pole. And she was making money doing this, and that was why she went on to Shark Tank, because she was looking to expand her business and get into the other holidays, maybe a letter from the Easter Bunny, that sort of thing, and actually develop the business so that she could take care of her and her kids and yet still have a home life. She was working from home. And this goes back to identity. One of the things that she said struck a chord with me was, I knew that I could do this because I'm a mom, and moms can do anything. So when I was talking to John, kind of going back to the identity piece in his chapter, I was trying to tell him that the same identities that we use to keep ourselves from achieving success are the same identities that we can use to enable us to achieve success. So we look at the drag queen. Oh, I can't do that. I'm just X. But the identity of a drag queen is such that they have to go. It represents that yin and yang that I talked about earlier. Vita is the elegant, wants to help people drag queen, and that is her identity, and she just wants to share that with other people. So to bring this back around, everyone in this movie is struggling to find their own empowering identity. Even all of the ladies not even just the ladies, all of the ladies in the town, and the young man at the general store, we'll call it. Everyone is trying to find their own identity, and even the sheriff is. When he's sitting at the bar talking about trying to find these men who dress as women, and he goes into this sort of weird, almost homoerotic, out loud internal conversation with himself as monologue about their hairy bodies pressed up against each other and the occasional whiff of something. And you're like, oh, so he's struggling with identity too. It was amusing. It really did throw all of these stereotypes at the movie and poke fun at each of them in turn. And I don't know, there's a part of me, and I know this kind of goes towards final thoughts, there's a part of me that thinks maybe there was a little too much in it. Maybe they focused on too many stereotypes and didn't really narrow in on a select few to kind of embrace the whole story, if you know what I'm talking about.
I think I see where you're going. Yeah, I think that if anybody was to have any kind of gripe or criticism on this movie, I think that it does have a very singular focus on an aspect of life. Dealing with your, if you want to say, dealing with a gender identity, or that am I, I was like the sheriff, am I really gay? No, I got to struggle with that because I'm not gay, and society says I can't be gay, so therefore I'm not gay. It's like because he fell into the stereotypical. You're protesting a little bit too much there, buddy, or as Shakespeare would put it.
Methinks he doth protest too much.
Exactly. But the thing I'm going to have to disagree with you on that is, like, when you talk about people finding their identity, I think the only characters in this film who were struggling to find their identity were the people in the hamlet. Before the trio arrived, I mean, they just kind of were there. They were just existing. The extent of their identities were, we live here. And that was pretty much it. There was just the earth tones of the village, the hamlet. It was dusty. There wasn't much color. There wasn't much life. There was just existence. Our characters, Vita, Noxzema, and even Chi-Chi, they had their identities. they are, drag queens, and of course Chi Chi was the novice who was the little boy in the dress, but he saw himself as a drag queen. They had their identities. Now their journey, we had to find out, is like they had to learn how to use those identities and how to fit into their identities, but they had them. They knew who they were. They just had to work out how to be those people. But yeah, finding the identities were the journey of the townsfolk. That's the only qualifier that I would put to your statement there.
Okay, I will accept that. I think that the only minor modification I would make is that Chi-Chi, Noxzema, and Vita were honing their identities, which is functionally the same thing, as you're saying.
Yeah, that's a good word.
There were some interesting allegories in this movie. In fact, the one that struck me the most was when Vita went out to pick the flowers for Stockard Channing's character and said they're something to the effect of they're wildflowers that are beautiful, but they grow in crappy environments.
I remember that scene, yes.
Yeah, I like that. That was nice. One of the things that I didn't care for about this movie, but I understood it as a part of the story and a part of Stockard Channing's character, which, by the way, I think she did great in, and I, again, forgot that Stockard Channing was in this movie. This goes to my musical-loving self as Rizzo in the movie Grease, so I'm a big fan of Stockard Channing.
Go on.
Yay! But the part where Virgil is beating the crap out of her, or when he walks in and there's spice in the spaghetti sauce, I don't want to delve too deep into it, but that speaks to some of my childhood experiences, and there were parts of that hit kind of close to home. So to see that in movies, period, always makes me a little uncomfortable. Not because I don't recognize that it exists, but because sometimes it takes me back to a place that I don't want to go. So when Vita comes in and kicks the crap out of Virgil, I do feel a sense of justification, and I don't know what the right word is for the emotion. There's the happiness, like, hey, he got his comeuppance, he got what he deserved. But there's a part of me that hangs on to a little bit of understanding that this is the idyllic movie setting where everything is assumed to go on in a way that is positive for Stockard Channing's character and not in the way that real life works. So that part of the movie always bothers me.
I get it. Obviously I don't think I felt the same way, but I get how you could feel about that.
And that was my therapy moment, as we had your therapy moments during our last episode.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about talking with friends about movies. I would say every movie, to some degree, whether it be a small degree that you hardly notice or to a movie that speaks to you, it's like they all have some therapeutic value to them, as to whether or not we feel like we want to be stronger. We see action movies and we want to be that person, or movies that take us back to happy times, or even make us relive sad times that on the surface we'll say, I don't ever want to relive that again, but deep down inside you need to get through that. That's how you find closure.
But it also gives you that moment to pull out those feelings and kind of look at them, if only for a few minutes, and understand that I don't feel that way anymore, but occasionally, you recognize that they're still there, and that shapes, again, going back to identity, that shapes your identity, or hones your identity, as we'd spoken about. So it was just interesting because, so we talk about closure, and we talk about time healing all wounds and all that sort of stuff, but the scars are still there. So you can still look at these things and remember that they happened. You're just not as hurt by them as you used to be. So I like that aspect of movies, and in a way I like that about this movies because it does take me back to that darker place and reminds me where I came from and why I feel the way I feel about certain things.
Yeah, that's good.
You can't. That's the best you got.
That's the best
all you got.
I got.
That's good.
Well, like you said, I had my therapeutic movement. I had
Your
my
therapeutic movement? I had a therapeutic movement earlier this morning.
I had my therapeutic moment in our last discussion. This one's yours. I don't want to take away from that. It's not just about me.
It's ironic that when Nina suggested this movie and then you gave her the three options, the third of which was this one, and obviously, I don't know if you expected that or not, but she picked this one. That was one of the things that I was kind of not looking forward to about rewatching this movie, was that little piece. But again, it's not a big deal. It's just a thing that I noticed about myself while I was watching the movie. So I think that's goes to what you were saying. That's part of why we watch movies, is to get a brief look at an example of a life that either we want to live or we want to use as inspiration. I think that's why a lot of really well-made biopics do so well, is because they capture the inspiration of the person that is being portrayed. If it's an inspirational person. I mean, I'm hoping that people aren't inspired by a biopic of, let's say, Hitler, but they capture the emotion involved in what the actual person did. So
I would like to just say that yeah, that is but one facet of
oh yeah, it's definitely not the only reason we do it.
a larger gem as to why we watch movies. I mean, it's like there's so many reasons why, but yeah, that's definitely a very significant.
Yeah, sometimes I like to just go see big giant robots beating each other up on the screen. So just saying.
There is that. But in this case, I like to see big giant drag queens go on a road trip.
Speaking of which, and I don't know this, and I'm asking for the sake of asking, but how tall was Patrick Swayze? I don't think he was terribly tall.
Don't think so either. I don't think any of these people were particularly tall.
5'10".
Oh, you found it?
Which I found it. It's
Okay,
on the
so
Google box.
yeah, he wasn't short, but he was.
But in this movie, he towers over everyone. Now I understand he's wearing heels. I get that.
Yeah, but I think that was the characterization that they wanted. Because I mean, again, these are manly men, and manliness and height in our society go hand in hand. So to make that juxtaposition of a drag queen being portrayed by a manly man, he had to be tall, and so much taller.
Oh, being tall and regal.
Yeah.
Yeah, the camera angles that they used were definitely designed to make Patrick Swayze, I think, taller than he was in real life. Again, heels notwithstanding.
Yeah. How tall was Wesley Snipes?
He's 5'9". And I think John Leguizamo is even shorter than that.
Yeah, no, I know John Leguizamo is a short man. I don't think very many movies portray him as tall.
I don't think so. No, he's 5'8". He's my height.
Yeah. So Patrick Swayze being the tallest of them.
I think the height that they portray the characters as gives the characters that air of authority in their identity. Because we look up to tall people, and you mentioned this earlier, as like, oh, you're tall, you must be manly and all that kind of stuff. And it forces people to look up to them in the visual sense that sort of gives you the figurative sense as well.
I could agree with that.
Because I think there's a point in there where Stockard Channing looks like she's looking at the moon when she's talking to Patrick Swayze. You're like, wow, that much taller. Again, 5'10" in heels. Let's say they're 3 or 4 inch heels. That makes 6 foot, 6'1". Okay, that's reasonably tall. But Stockard Channing had to be like 5'2" if she's looking up at the angle that she's looking up. It seemed weird at the time, but I think it's consistent throughout the movie that they are taller than they really should be.
And again, I think that lends to the storytelling mechanics of it, because again, these are men in drag,
right?
And we have to deal with the juxtaposition because we're in our society, we're used to seeing women as small, demure, meek, which Stockard Channing could very well have been shrunk.
Sure, sure.
camera magic, to portray the meek, battered wife.
Right, and I'm sure she was. I was talking to a friend of mine about the movie 12 Angry Men from the 60s. Are you familiar with the movie?
Yeah, love that movie, by the way.
One of the things that they did throughout the movie was they started, the room was confining and very, or rather was very open, and then as they move through the movie it becomes more and more confining. But they just changed the camera angles and they changed like the positioning of the table to give it a more claustrophobic feel, so they heightened the tension of the room. And it's, again, goes to camera magic. They did a good job with the camera angles to portray the role that they wanted each character to play in the scene. And I don't usually talk about things like that because, to be quite honest, I don't usually notice it, but it was one of the things that struck me in this particular movie.
For me, it's kind of a growing hobby of, again, I've talked about it before. There's some couple YouTube channels on movie making that I follow. When they talk about camera angles and even directions as to where certain characters are looking, it's the thing that amazes me about filmmakers, that they work all these little elements to create a single emotion. And for this film, having Stockard Channing looking up at Patrick Swayze in such a way, again, to portray that she's meek and he's the powerful figure. But I think, I don't know if you noticed, and again, it's subtle. Most people would probably dispute it, but like towards the end of the movie, they do tend to start to look a little more eye to eye.
Yeah, and again, it goes to that visual storytelling, that subconscious of we are meeting as equals, as opposed to, I have found my strength and I am now an equal.
Yeah, because it definitely isn't Patrick Swayze's character shrinking. It definitely Stockard Channing's character growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I liked the through line with her about the battered woman, but again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about too many elements in the story. Had they taken out the sheriff's bit and they'd have just broken down in a small town, I think they still could have had a complete story. I think if they'd have done away with one or the other of those elements, it still would have been a complete story. It's kind of like, neither one individually was required.
Yeah, I'd categorize the sheriff as fluff.
Sure, the only thing that he served was to bring the town together at the end, as that's my shoe and the whole twist on the Cinderella story.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's the Spartacus moment there. I'm Spartacus.
I am Spartacus. Yeah.
But I think, though, the only purpose that he possibly could have served is that Virgil, attempted to use him to get back at his wife by getting at Vita and Noxzema.
They're like, they're in legal trouble. Yeah, they need, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to use this and everything. I think it just having that fluff kind of added them that they both have a motivation. It wasn't just some random cop he pulled it. I got this cop, and like, this guy that we've been making fun of because he's been struggling with his own homosexuality, he might actually be a threat. I think that maybe served a purpose there.
Yeah, and I think the other piece did lend a little bit more levity because he was the outlandish stereotype of a homophobe and racist. Again, let's not forget that piece. But he, as portrayed, has the homophobia because he's afraid of his own potential homosexuality. And they show that, but then he's standing up on a rooftop with a bullhorn saying, "You don't want their kind here! They're gonna change the way you do things and look at things, and they're gonna make life different." And he is the very vocal minority that is scared to death of change. And by change, I mean the acceptance of people for who they are, as opposed to the acceptance of people who conform to my ideas of normalcy. I used your N-word, sorry. Yeah, he represents all of the, and I don't want to be insulting, but all of the small-minded people who can't accept that if someone is doing a thing that is not hurting you or causing you pain, why are you even concerned about it? And again, it's very obvious in the movie when he's up there and the whole town shows up wearing the red and talking, I'm a drag queen, I'm a drag queen. And when Jimmy Joe, the cafe owner, the black guy in the movie, he shows up and he's up there rubbing himself and saying, I'm a drag queen. They're like, that's my shoe. You know, that made me laugh because, again, you've got all these people who represent the majority of society who didn't understand a thing, but when exposed to a thing realized, hey, you know what? This isn't so horrible. This isn't what I thought it was. And this one guy, the sheriff, is still going off about how horrible it is when we've already seen that it's not a big thing.
That portrayal is exemplifying the part of humanity that, yeah, in spite of the evidence, in spite of what they see, will vilify it. They'll chastise it. It's not a commentary on what they are chastising. It's more of a commentary on who they are. That's the hardest part about changing somebody's mind. Any issue is getting them to look at themselves. It's when you can look at yourself and say that, you know, I'm no different than this person, so why am I prejudiced against this person? Or I'm fearful of my possible homosexuality, which may or may not even exist, but I'm scared of it anyways. And that's why I'm going to chastise these people.
Yeah, I thought that a guy was handsome once. I could be gay. Oh, no.
Yeah, you ever seen a grown man naked?
Yes.
Well, yeah,
yes, I have. I was
yes,
in the Navy.
Yeah.
Seen plenty of them.
Many times, and I can, you know, and that's the conversation I have even with gay friends. You know, it's like it almost feels it's like we're at a stage in our society where if I say that I'm not gay, you have to qualify that saying I'm not saying that in any prejudicial manner. I just know for a fact. I mean that you were able to one day look in the mirror and say I'm gay. I can look in the mirror and say I'm not. You know?
I find that interesting because some people will put disclaimers on statements that years ago it seems like you wouldn't have had to. Sort of when some people say, well, I'm not gay, comma, not that there's anything wrong with that. You know, like, okay, I don't, that kind of, maybe you can help me out with this. I don't understand why you would have to say that.
Because we're a society in flux, and there's turbulence, you know, and it's like when you're trying to navigate rough waters, you got to make the differentiation between that was a rogue wave and that was me, you know, that was my maneuvering, or sorry, that was just the waves hit me in such a way I'm trying to correct, and we're trying to find a nice course to get to where we're going.
Yeah, maybe I think maybe that's the answer. It vexes me that we are so quick to put a disclaimer on things. I'm not gay. That is a single standalone statement, but people feel the need to qualify it and say, not that there's anything wrong with that.
To drift off a little bit off the subject of the film or anything, but I think people feel they have to say that because they don't want to be associated with the people who do find something wrong with that. They want to make sure that they're not part of that, which, you know, in and of itself is kind of a good thing. We get us saying that, you know, yeah, there is something wrong with being prejudiced, and I just want to make sure that you understand I'm not part of that problem, so that we can continue a dialogue, that we can continue having a relationship, and that maybe one day we can go together and watch this movie and not feel uncomfortable. It's like, you know, for whatever reason, that we can watch it together.
And it goes back to the very beginning of what we said. I did not feel uncomfortable with the drag queen parts, with the, you know, in fact, there wasn't really any homosexuality to speak of in this movie. The only part where I even felt some uncomfortableness was with a thing that reminded me of an experience that I had had.
There was the one scene where one of the local boys was expressing that he kind of had a crush on Chi-Chi.
Mm-hmm.
Chi-Chi was going with it for a little while because she liked the attention. I've had some friends express a little bit of discomfort with that. And not discomfort like that's wrong, like, oh, what was going to happen if he actually went through with it? Was the boy going to figure that he was gay or something, or did he just not realize because that Chi-Chi was in drag? I said I don't know. The movie never really explored it, but they resolved
And
it.
again, that goes to life has more than one outcome. You may not like the way they resolved it. They left that unaddressed, but how many things in your life have you left unaddressed? It's a thing that happens, and I think the way they handled it showed the character's growth, which is the way it needed to be handled. I think they did a good job of writing that in and moving it along so that Bobby Lee and Bobby Ray could have their moment, and it's Roberta. Going back to identity as empowerment for just a little bit, they take young Roberta and they're showing her the Cleopatra movie, and they're telling her to be confident, to be certain in her identity. They're not telling her to be a drag queen. They're not telling her to be flamboyant. They do dress her up, and I'm reasonably certain that once the three characters leave that hamlet, it slips back into a more normal feeling environment. But as a wise man once said, the mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original shape. So I'm sure that will be that great big moment that brings the town together, and it will probably coincide with their annual celebration of the Strawberry Festival or whatever they were calling it, and that celebration will never be the same again, but the rest of their day-to-day lives will probably return to a fairly reasonable sense of normal life prior to the event.
But they'll be doing it happily ever
Yes,
after.
yeah, well, it's fun because, and we use that. It's a thing about movies. Again, Cinderella, and they all lived happily ever after. And they all lived ever after. Happily is subjective, and I'm sure they had other trials or tribulations or trials and tribulations just to prove that you can have those two things separately. They probably go back to doing whatever it is they do. The theater's closed. It's not like they can go to the movies. They, again, return to normal life and then celebrate that event, and it will remind them of a thing that changed their outlook.
Yeah, but you never know. The two young kids, they could get married, have kids. They could teach them the lessons they learned, start a whole new generation of confident, poised drag queens.
Did Bobby Ray learn anything? He learned that he liked girls, or at least people that look like girls.
I think if anything, that he probably learned the same lessons as the other boys learned about how to treat women, which he was he was already well on his way to that lesson, but I think he got a deeper lesson, and that was his experience.
I think of all the characters in the movie, his lesson was less needed to be learned, but I think he was the extreme nobility and how that can lead you in a direction you may not want to go, because he had that romantic notion that many have of, well, when you're in love you don't keep secrets, and he was the vehicle that moved Chi-Chi forward as opposed to anything developing with him, except for like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, I like her. Yeah, it was there in front of me all along.
Yeah, I would agree. That's probably his purpose. Because again, the lessons he would have to learn, he was already well on his way. He was in less need to learn them as the other three boys.
Yeah, was it 3 or 4? That part kind of bothered me too. I liked the small town trope. Everybody sort of just going about their lives, and they know each other, and you got the town gossip, and you got the town drunk, and you got this and that and the other thing, and everybody knows everything about everyone. But whose kids were the 4 young men? Whose were they? They never said whose they were. They just showed up, and they're
I think they were just there and just accept it and suspend disbelief.
like, we met everybody in the town. Nobody claimed them as their kids, and yet there are these 4 rat bastards who, try to accost Chi-Chi. They try to harass Noxzema. I don't recall if they interacted with Vita, but aside from when they were all in the group. But where did they come from? They just existed.
They were just the town
Yay!
toughs. You know?
Small town America.
Everybody had one.
Well, the other thing that I had to push the I believe button on was the amount of clothing that those three ladies had. I don't know where they kept it, but they damn sure, unless the trunk of that Cadillac was a +3 bag of holding, if you're down with the D&D reference.
Oh, I grew up with a sister, and she works in the fashion industry. You would be surprised how much clothes you can pack into a car. To me, that wasn't so much of a suspend disbelief.
Oh, okay. I was a little taken aback, if you will. Like, where are they keeping all of these clothes?
It's not like it was Gilligan's Island. It's like they're going for a 3-hour trip, and where the hell all these clothes come from? Versus we're going cross country to a drag show, a competition. Of course, they're going to pack a lot of clothes.
Well, Chi-Chi only packed a trash bag and another sack, I think. So, and the other thing that I did like, I found ironic, given that Wonder Woman came out a couple of weeks ago, is the use of the Wonder Woman theme when they're decorating the room. Do you remember that?
I do. It was. I hadn't put it together.
It was cheesy and fun in the middle of the movie, and I just thought it was amusing. Like, oh, that's funny because Wonder Woman just came out, and here they are playing the 1970s Linda Carter Wonder Woman theme song. I found that amusing and entertaining, and that's all I got to say about that.
I think we've said quite a lot about this movie. I think it's gonna be one of those things where somebody listens to this and didn't realize that there was so much to be said about certain movies, and I think this is definitely an example of that.
What are your final thoughts? Let's bring this around and sort of, how do you feel about the movie overall, and then we'll walk into where it belongs on your shelf.
Overall, no, I think this is a fun movie. It's rewatchable. Quality is very strong, especially it's home with the family, or even if I got friends, it's like they want to see a movie they've never seen before. I think this is a great example. It's entertaining. Like I said, great message. It's just a lot of fun, and I think it's summed up in that whole thing about when we talk about this as a road trip movie, and the line when they're renting the car, it's like do we do this with substance or with style? And I think this movie definitely did it with the style.
I agree with that summation. I think there were some parts, again, that I'd mentioned that I had some concerns about, some little things, but I think it was a good story. I think it was a good set of characters, and I just want to go back and say how interesting it was for three manly men to portray drag queens in a mainstream movie. I mean, this wasn't really an art house movie. It was something that had a wide release, and it was pretty impressive the way they didn't have any issues with that. So, where does this movie belong on your shelf?
No, it is as good as it is. It is a general population movie. I don't quite separate drag queen movies like I do other categories. I don't know. Maybe if I owned a few more, I would.
So you could put all three off to the side. I know there are more than that, but just we mentioned three consistently.
Of the three that we mentioned, I only own two. They're not a large enough group to separate them. But who knows? Maybe more will come out. Maybe more good ones that I'll own. But it's still general population.
Yeah, I would go watch it again. I would happily, like I said, I rented it. I would happily own it. I just haven't seen it anywhere in a while, and I haven't picked it up. So I would say that this movie for me belongs on about the third shelf, if you want to call it. It's a middle shelf, general population, but right in the middle of general population. It's not incredibly heady material. It's interesting. It's fun. It's well made, but it's not one of the movies like a Goofy movie last episode that has a special place in my heart, or like any other movies that we'll find that are top shelf that are just exceptionally well made. It's a good, serviceable, rewatchable movie. So it's in general population, third shelf, slightly toward the second shelf in that middle ground. All right, so since we don't have any listener comments to discuss or read, we will move on to the random magic movie button and find out what our next movie is. And that movie is
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
To our listeners, you can contact us via our Facebook page, leave comments on our episodes, leave feedback on things that you would like us to change or things that you would like us to keep doing. You can leave feedback on the Podbean page, which is linked from our Facebook page. You can send us email at wrios2016mr@gmail.com, or you can leave us a review on iTunes, Google Play, whatever your podcasting app is, and that will help make us better. So, along that line, we haven't received any listener feedback, and I'm gonna send out that vibe. Give us some feedback. We would love to hear from you. We're getting some decent downloads, I think, for what we're doing, and I want to thank everyone for listening. But we would appreciate the feedback. So we will see you in 2 weeks. Dan, you want to take us out?
I just want to say to all our listeners, you're so fabulous, you're so beautiful, it's like I'm a compass too far north.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.